Welcome to RELOGIA, where all disciplines connect via art, sci, tech, trialogues. I create. You create. We create. We create. Team 4, Co-Creative Environment, Art Sci Tech, Trialogue 7. On the Art Chair, Richard Reynolds, Course Leader, MA Applied Imagination, Central St. Martin's. RICHIE MANU, Senior Lecturer, MA Applied Imagination, Central St. Martin's, London, UK.
I'm Richard Reynolds, and this is my colleague.
And I'm RICHIE MANU.
And the way we're going to do this, roughly, is I'm going to talk for about 7.5 minutes about some of the ways that we work with our students to unblock and release their imagination. And then Richie's going to talk for another 7.5 minutes about some of the qualities that we try to bring out from them during this process. MA Applied Imagination is a student-centered, multidisciplinary course at Central St. Martin's. It's existed for nearly 30 years now under various guises, and it does not have a knowledge-based curriculum. The students in the latter part of the course study whatever they wish to study. What we work with them to achieve is rigor and definition in their creative and their research processes. Now, if I move on, oh, nothing's coming up. There we go. Oop, we're going ahead of ourselves there, right? Asking better questions, that's our course motto. I thought we'd try to get you to experience, therefore, what it's like to be at our course. Say at the beginning of our course, I'd like you to picture yourself, if you will, because we're January start. It's a cold, dark January evening, about the 6th or 7th or 8th of January in London, and we've got a room full of people who've just arrived from many places around the world. And the first job we have to do, really, is to start making explicit some of the mapping processes, some of the naive mapping, some people call it, that people have about the world. So I start with a proposition, and my apologies, this is London-centric, but remember that's where we're working. The proposition is this: let's imagine all of us in this classroom take an underground train to Heathrow Airport, and all of us get on an aircraft together, and we fly due west, out across England and Ireland, out across the Atlantic, due west. What would be the first state of the United States that we would fly over? Any answers? If you flew due west from London, what would be the first state of the United States the aircraft would fly over? Anyone in the audience have a guess? Don't be shy. Pardon? Not correct. Not even more not correct. I'll take 2 more answers, 2 more guesses. Which one? No, that's way down in the south. That's south of New York. Another guess? Which one? No. Okay. Sometimes people say Canada. And then I say, well, Canada's not part of the United States unless something happened overnight that I don't know about. The answer is if you fly due west from London, you miss all of the continental United States, so Canada is sort of in the right direction. And the first part of the United States you would hit if you flew due west would be Alaska, the Aleutian Islands. This is not a lesson in geography. This is about naive mapping. It's about the fact that we carry around in our heads very inaccurate maps of the world, but we think they're correct. You know, that's an objective thing. I can show you, and some people are very disbelieving of this, but it's the truth. I can show you that London is on the same latitude as Alaska. It's very far north. But when we get to more abstract things, more personal things about ideology, about politics, about personal belief systems, it's obviously much more difficult to encourage people to let go of belief systems, of mappings of the world that are holding them back, that are blocking them from releasing creative possibilities. So we start a lot from maps, and we do a lot with showing how maps create our vision of the world, maps in the broadest sense. Take me, when I was a teenager, I was not good at advanced mathematics. I had a lot of problems with concepts like imaginary numbers, square root of -1. And the reason I had these problems was because I was always trying to bring mathematics back to a common sense view of the world. I wanted it to make sense in my common sense worldview, but it doesn't. One day my father, who was an industrial scientist and designed high-tension power cables, said one of the few things he said to me that I've always remembered. He said, "Richard, every time I design a AC high-tension power cable, which uses the sine wave curve to organize the alternating current, I have to use the square root of -1 in the sine wave equations, which is an imaginary number." He said, "I could lie awake all night worrying what that means, but I choose not to." And I think that was a really important lesson I learned from him. We have to make explicit and not tacit the systems, the mapping that we're using at any particular moment to engage with the world in order to unblock our creative potential or make some kind of cognitive transformation, like's happening in this image, to make free our brain. You see, people ask me, they ask Richie, how do you teach creativity? I said, you can't teach creativity. All human beings are creative, but what we can help you with is to remove the blockages that are preventing you from even looking at the question you're trying to solve, or only looking at the question. Oop, now why does it do that? There we go. So take this. There's some creativity happening here, and I think this is a good example of how we work through the mapping system. There are a lot of versions of this on the internet. I don't know if you've ever seen any of them. The bicycle-powered washing machine. And so what somebody's done here, I've seen it done many times, is you take an ordinary bicycle and you remove the back wheel, or you put the back wheel up on a stand and you connect it to an ordinary drum washing machine, and you get on it and you pedal, and hey presto, you can wash your clothes without using any electricity. If you think about that, that's one of the places we first have to go to when we apply our creativity. We have to take the parts of something, two different maps. You know, washing machines and bicycles are not the same. But if we bring them together, or we split them up and we bring parts of the functions of those devices together, we can start to create something new, which eventually can be perhaps more elegantly packaged into something people would work with. I'm having a lot of trouble with this, like some people do. Now it's gone blank. There's another, should be another slide. Huh? Now we've gone back to the beginning. Jeepers. Now it goes blank. Right. So in this process, though, we have to accept that there's going to be a certain amount of failure. And this is another one of the processes that we have to get our students used to. When I'm interviewing people for the course, somebody said, what do you look for? I said, I look for bravery. I look for people who are not afraid of things going wrong, who don't imagine that they have to be right at every single step of the process. Just as, you know, you can be Philip Stark and design a lemon squeezer that doesn't really work and looks like a Martian, but nevertheless it's very successful from the point of view of a design item. And we've got a builder here that comes up. So if we think about the crossover between what we do and perhaps scientific method, the difference between empirical research, which is about prediction, as my physics teacher used to say to me when I was a teenager, prediction, 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 gentlemen, that is the essence of science. Of course, we respect that, we live in that world, we use it, we invite our students to use empirical work when they get towards the end of their projects and they're looking for some kind of confirmation. But in the early stages of the project and in the exploratory stage, we invite them to use action research, which requires making a change in the world without necessarily, probably not understanding what the outcome is going to be, and then using that iterative change to create an improvement. How do we know it's an improvement? That's when we have to bring evaluation and reflection to bear, thinking about our stakeholders, the people involved in the project, to be clear, is this change benefiting people or not? So we must learn to be wrong. It's okay to be lost. So many of our students come to us and say, Richie, I feel lost. And these days I say there's a whole book, wonderful book by Rebecca Solnit, the American writer, A Field Guide to Getting Lost. I really recommend that to you. It demystifies the idea of being lost, and it exemplifies how the feeling of being lost is the beginning of the creative process. The fact that you have let go of one set of mapping and you are using another. And this disappearance off the map, this acceptance that we've abandoned one version of mapping, we're trying another, opens the gateways to serendipity, to the possibility of unexpected but fortuitous discoveries on the journey. What's going on now? This brings us to the quality of curiosity, the quality that starts to come out when we start to investigate that process. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Richie to take you through that part of the journey.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So just a reminder of my role. I teach at the university on the course Applied Imagination, but I'm also a writer. I've written on the subject of creativity and trying to unpack this rather nebulous or intangible quality. And so part of my role in the next few minutes is to try and show you how we use curiosity as a really important tool as part of our own pedagogy as academics, but also getting students to use that as part of the action research process. So I'm going to just use some words that is coming from University of the Arts London, our UAL strategy for 2015-2022. I'll just read it out to you. So curiosity is critical for learning in the arts, and it's at the heart of our curriculum. Now that's good, but that's always presented problems if we cannot put a figure or in some way bring some level of tangibility to what we mean by curiosity. So I'm going to try and unpack some of that today. We may not get there. I'm not going to convince any of you today that curiosity is this thing that we can put into a bag, but at least look at it as something that is beneficial to the creative learning process. So to start, perhaps it's worth looking at how researchers and theorists have tried to look at, and also people in science have tried to look at creativity. So I'm just going to borrow a quick line from here from a colleague, RHYTHMiCS Camargo, and there was an article she wrote some years back on how curiosity makes us smarter. I'm just going to read out this first line here, which she says, curiosity is a complex system with neurocognitive, psychological, and biological mechanisms that result in behaviors like creativity and intelligence. And it's that bit at the end, creativity and intelligence. And to put this into a context of how this starts to fall into our curriculum, I'm taking a quote here from Ian Leslie, who curiously wrote a book called Curious. And he says here, he's talking about curious people. They are also the ones most likely to make creative connections between different fields of a kind that lead to new ideas and the ones best suited to working in multidisciplinary teams. And I think that's really important. We're talking about the intersectionality, the connection between disparate areas, but also collaborating in multidisciplinary teams. And this is essential to this whole process of creativity. So I want to, for a minute, just use a provocation I've used in my own writing, and it's a term that I coined a few years ago as part of my own research, but also something that I wanted to test because we were still in this space that we were looking at curiosity as something that we couldn't quite measure. So I wanted to look at how this would work if we presented it as a diagram and gave some context through a graphic. So I'm going to take the position for the time being, and I know this could work in lots of different areas, and I realize this is art-centric or looking at the creative economies and the creative industries, but I want us to think about the notion or the possibility of what this might look like if we looked at our core discipline. So let's go on this basis that we're looking at creativity and our core discipline, our interests. And for the moment, let's position that as art. I know that's broad, but let's position and think about what that might look like if our curiosity and our knowledge was all in this space. But if we open that up to another space where we said, right, okay, we want to open it up into a space that is perhaps not our discipline, what might that look like? So provocatively, I might say, well, somebody who's got a discipline in art might start to either take an interest outside of their area of expertise and look at sound. Now, that's already happening. There are many artists, designers who are already looking at this intersection. But I wanted to go further and look at areas that would be way outside of their field of expertise. So in this scenario, we're seeing art, somebody who's in that field, and then we're going into the space of sound. And then we're going even further. This is an artist who is curious about looking at the element of science, or even for what it is, what it means to be human. So that's a very, very bold attempt to try and figure out how we go from this space as an artist right through to sound, right through to science. I'm going to try and put that into context, and I know I'm at the mercy of digital, so hopefully this will play. So, to put that into context, we've looked at Ryoji Ikeda, who some of you might be familiar with as an artist. He was a resident artist at CERN many years ago, and I was fortunate enough to go to Supersymmetry many years ago, where we looked at the work. He presented this work in the Brewer Street car park in London, which was, for me, a very bold attempt to use as a curatorial space this space that looked at the intersection of art, sound, and also biology. And I'll just read here. Supersymmetry presented an artistic vision of the reality of nature through an immersive and sensory experience. Let's hope this plays.
This project itself, I can't categorize. This is so unique, and this is something so special. You can see how it's special to me. It's like human, you know, the many organs in it, and that inspired me. Is fantastic. It's just really massive and just concrete. And I like the contrast between this precision and the roughness of this space. And it's a very unique project of this itself.
So I sat in the front row, and Kelly, I think it was in the breakout room, I said, oh, I'm going to be referencing someone who really inspires me, and it so happens that he's a good friend of yours. Please send him my regards. And what I find incredible about, well, actually, let me just put a definition here, because I think and this might sound complex, but I think put into context, it starts to think about the intersectionality. So I'll read it out here. In particle physics, supersymmetry, an example of what we saw there from RELOGIA, is a proposed extension of space-time symmetry that relates two classes of elementary particles, boson and fermion, and predicts a partner particle in the standard model. But I think what was really interesting about this was how it was also looking at that intersectionality. So I'm just going to briefly go on, and I'm given a timeout, so I'm just going to briefly go into this diagram, which looks at multi-modality. So this space that people like RHYTHMiCS are already occupying. And if we go for a moment and think about this space, what I'm often telling my students is that it's now important to look at multidisciplinary spaces, but also to be sure that you don't have to be in this circus where everything has to be multidisciplinary or this multi-sensory space where it's almost overwhelming. But there is another option to think about, not just being more considered about the senses that you want to deploy, like we saw with Akita, but also that there are possibilities for what we call exit points. So you can just think about this space of what we call unimodality. So you can go into a space where it's possible to, and especially in the curatorial space, to be in a space where only one sense is the demand. So in this space here, only smell was the leading sense, the leading modality. And this, I think, has got to be the future. So this was the art of sense, and a recognized and celebrated fragrance as a true artistic form. And this is the space we're occupying. One last quick film to show you before we finish.
Music should be for everyone. Introducing this sound shirt, a wearable device that enables the deaf to experience a concert through touch sensations. After 6 months of development, we put it to the test. Microphones all over the stage cover the different types of instruments. A software converts the sound into data and sends it to the shirt, where 16 vibration motors pulsate with the intensity of the music. For example, the bass on the stomach and the violins along the arms. Several deaf people tested the shirt, and their reactions speak for themselves. The sound shirt, now available at the Young Symphonic Orchestra of Hamburg.
So to conclude, that was the work of an organization, a fashion company called Cute Circuit, where they were looking at the intersection of fashion, but fashion that goes beyond its function as a piece of clothing, but also looking at how we're starting to look at work which is looking at biofeedback and the link with how it reacts to our body. So this was a company who were intensely curious about how far they could push fashion. We can finish on this.
I think that's the conclusion, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've got the next slide where we just mention our... Yes, that's the festival we have at the end of our year, and it's happening on the 4th and 5th of December, in a couple of weeks' time at Central St. Martin's. So please drop by if you can. Thank you very much, Svetlana, and everyone else for inviting us.
Thank you very much.
What are the questions we're not asking?
Dear audience, please go to slide.do with hashtag RELOGIA01 to ask your questions of the speakers. Thank you.
On the science chair, Professor Dr. Peter Tzanev, Head of Department Psychology of Art, Art Education and General Education Subject, National Academy of Arts Sofia, Bulgaria.
First, I have to invite Iota Demetriou. Offside. To give her RELOGIA award for her project. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm just going to say very few words because we don't have a lot of time. First of all, it's a huge honor to be here today. It's an honor because it took me a great effort and labor to create my project, which is a heat-sensitive and touch-sensitive book about love and loss and grief, which you'll be able to see downstairs in the exhibition with all the other great works. But it's also an honor to be invited to be a part of a community that embraces consciousness and imagination and curiosity, as you greatly described before. Because as artists and scholars, research, interdisciplinary research sometimes is quite lonely. So it's great to be part of a wider community, and thank you very much for my award.
I chose this title, Where Do the Images Go? Because I think that art is a form of ritual thinking. And the most important question posed today by the convergence between art science and technology is where do the images go? Okay. I think that art today produces images as a projection of human creativity over new, exciting areas in which we are preparing to life. And the more we become aware of the virtual nature of our consciousness, the more we accept it to life in a reality that is dominated by virtual characteristics. But where do the images live? This is small upper Paleolithic shell is chosen for its beauty, maybe, or for some other symbolic meaning. Images in art pass from animated characters through impersonal structures, and now maybe go to speculative psychological situations. According to American art thinker and philosopher Thomas Machiavelli, the idea of art as a representation of soul has remained central to Western art more from 2 millennia. The figure and the forms of art continue to exist as a prison and tomb soul until the painting, until the abstraction marks the complete conversion to pure spirituality. The other part is related to the discovery of the art object. And Machiavelli claimed that this doubt turns sculpture into an object. And for him, the ready-made is the most critical object and the most radical gesture. After the idea of art as a representation of the soul, comes the idea of art as a representation of consciousness. Higher forms of consciousness become the ultimate goal of modern art. The invention of White Cube as museum and gallery institution becomes the ideal modern structure that embodies the absolute models of consciousness. This is my favorite works of art of 20th century made by Joseph Kossut. Any 2-meter square sheet on glass to lean against any wall. It is in the middle of 20th century. And I think this is a lot of psychological tension in this work, I find. Historically, the greatest discoveries of art in the 20th century are related to the discovery of abstraction and object. These two genres continue to dictate the development of art in the first 2 decades of 21st century, and the objects becomes the main genre of Dada, Surrealism, New Realism, Pop art, Minimalism, Conceptual art, and post-conceptual condition of art today. The triumph of psychology as an independent modern area made possible a lot of representational models of art. I think that the symbolist art at the beginning of 20th century was born in the secret, was based on the categories of transcendent psychology, and abstract art was born in the secret world of theosophical psychology, and almost all ideas of surrealism were related to psychoanalysis, and just as Gestalt psychology looked behind the discoveries of op art, and abstract expressionism was immersed in the archetypal messages of Jungian psychology, and minimalism was involved in phenomenological psychology, and conceptual art was in coalition with the successful invasion of cognitive psychology. Well, it can be very difficult to demonstrate how different psychological constructs are realized in art. It is much easier to see the function of art in societies with developed psychological technologies, and the influence of this on the historical development of art. Yes, this was another important work of Spanish artist Santiago Sierra, which demonstrates the interpersonal psychology and our possibility to identification in the objects of art. The post-conceptual condition of art is focused on the possibility of creating objects that can only be talked about at the level of art. The contemporary autonomy of art objects within the realm of objects not defined as art depends on their potential as objects. My main suggestion is that at present we exist within the objects of art, and that art is a tool that we cannot exit. In this diagram, I illustrate how I understand the great German art thinker Hans Belting, that for whom art becomes the sphere of the artist who assumes control of the image as proof of his or her art, and the crisis of the old image and the emergence of the new concept of art are interdependent. But if we develop Belting's claim that images live in their media, in their medium, much as we live in our bodies, we can say that modern images live best in pure media, and postmodern images prefer to live in intermedia or multimedia, and that now contemporary art, or I think about post-contemporary, I think after, before 4 or 5 years ago, we are in the period of post-contemporary art. Images live in condition of medium transgression. But I expanded this, and for me, a very important part of the life of the images in their preferred medium is the specific niche of their existence, which is made possible only by the invention of each new genre of art, or in art. It is not possible to imagine modern art and the impact of its images without the emergence of such new genre as collage, abstraction, ready-made, or postmodern art also imposed its images in new genres such as installation art, appropriation art, institutional critique. And contemporary art is now experimenting with images that offer possible organization of the visible across new genres such as post-medium art and this very important, I think, new genre, artistic research. My experience as artist last year in a round space building. I think that consciousness is not only a process, but also a holistic landscape where nothing has its identity. outside of its relationship with other elements of consciousness. And that images are more than representations, and they could act and respond. And this diagram is about the connection between art images and science images. Art images need to be perceived and experienced. Science images need to be explained and understood. But after the middle of 20th century, and the beginning of 21st, there is a new relation between images and knowledge. And now, art images need to be explained, and science images need to be experienced. And the decision, I think, is making art inside science and making science inside art. Thank you.
Dear audience, please join us at slide.do with hashtag RELOGIA01 for your questions to the speakers. Thank you.
A little bit art.
On the tech chair, Dr. KATHARAKIS, Vice Chairman of the Regional Research and Innovation Council of Crete, Greece.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm very glad being here. Actually, these few days are very stimulating and actually worth making the trip from Crete, the sunny island, and come here in the rainy environment, but it's a very fruitful environment, so I like it very much. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting us here, especially Svetlana, because she came back to Crete and there she gave us the opportunity to join this meeting. I also would like to take the opportunity to introduce this book that was created. Perhaps all of you have already taken it. It's a very interesting book. There are 25 different, I would say, essays, but it's more than this. Actually, I believe this is a basis for what is going to come later. It's a book that all of us introduced our different opinions and expectations in what is now a solid material that may also become a basis for what is going to happen in the next years. And I believe what started here in Bulgaria, in Sofia, is a basis to actually, and I'm hoping so, to change the way we are looking at the education, at the knowledge, at the data, and in many, many different things that actually, right now, I don't think that there are the correct words to characterize them. Because, you see, it's this interdisciplinarity which makes us speak a different language. And sometimes this language doesn't allow us to communicate. So, as was described before, is this Babylonia or Babylon thing that makes us speak in parallel monologues and not in trialogues or dialogues that we should do during our discussions in science. And also, I would like to take this opportunity to say that being a scientist is not enough nowadays. Perhaps we should change our universities to deal with innovation and devise innovation studies and not science studies. Maybe science is not anymore enough to take our world in the next steps. But okay, enough with this kind of talking. It's a stochastic talking. Maybe we have the chance to do it in a round table with a good wine, but not now. Okay, so I will come to my topic. And my topic has to do with the knowledge. You see, all these days we are discussing about the early young stage of learning or the university. But what about the adult learning? And you see, during our existence on the planet, we were based on technology from the day we started the first fire to the day that we discovered the genome. But day by day, this process doesn't seem to evolve enough fast as it concerns the perception of knowledge in our brains. And this is a topic I would like to stay for a while. So we have the ability to drive change, and staying on the level we are today is about driving the change which was faster from all the other existing beings on the planet. I don't know about the universe, I'm talking about the planet now. And this ability to effectively drive change is challenged today. And it's challenged by something which is called computer evolution. I don't want to be critic on computers, and this is not my intention. So this is something that I don't want to tackle or to touch. But computer evolution is a reality. And what is happening around us today, and the last years, perhaps the last decades, I should say, is that there is an enormous amount of data or knowledge that is created around us. And we are now in such a situation that we can no longer anticipate all this data. And to understand this, just take a look on your TV sets and see how many channels at the same time are producing material that you cannot watch, or how many instances are happening around the world that you cannot watch. Of course, this information were there because things were happening also in the past, but now we have all of this information in front of our eyes, but we cannot accumulate it. And on the other side, computers, they are there, and they have enhanced their learning abilities. They've enhanced their learning capabilities. We help them to do that. And with technologies like AI and big data, they already overwhelmed us in introducing, learning, accumulating, and using information, because we are in front of the Industry 4, or already in the Industry 4 revolution. And there, the machines are already networking, talking between each other, and very fast creating new information, even taking decisions if you are going to get your next loan or not, or if your salary will be in the level it is today or not. So technological innovation, which is also about decision-making, seems to go away from our hands and going towards the decision-making systems, which could be something like big data-assisted artificial intelligence. On the other hand, we are already living the robot age, and what is happening there? We have a lot of humans going away from the workplaces, and algorithmic processes are already taken by computers. And so the available working vital space of humans are every day smaller and smaller. And this is not an easy task to overcome. Of course, you could say that at the same time we have new professions and there are a lot of new things happening, so people have always the opportunity to take these new jobs. Yes, this is correct, but if you say that, then you must admit that change is the main thing that we have to embrace if we want to stay on the level we are today. And when you embrace this change, you find out that at the age of 40 or 50, or actually every 3 to 4 years, you need to change your profession. And when you are going to change your profession, you need more information. And you need more information, but also new skills. So it was very interesting a talk I saw this morning talking about knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And can you imagine people of the age of 60 or 50, because life expectancy goes up every year, or, okay, maybe not in every place of this planet, but life expectancy is going up. So can you imagine what is happening when you're asking a 50 years old to change his attitudes? Which are our tools to do that? And can you compare these learning disabilities or these learning difficulties, let's say it more correctly, with the computers? So you have the computers learning fast and faster day by day, and you have the humans having the same process of learning that they had also 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. You have a teacher and a student. So clearly this model is not enough. And for instance, when we are talking about the human body, if you think of a surgery that was happening 50 or let's say 100 years ago, the surgical room has anything to do with today's surgical room? I believe everybody agrees that these two rooms are completely different, the old one and the new one, because we have the information. And still today we have the ability to intervene on the human body and make changes. But for a minute, just imagine what is happening with the brain. When you want to introduce information in the brain, what new techniques actually we have developed today? There are a lot of experiments, a lot of trials, but practically we are staying on the same level with educational theories that we were 50 or 100 years ago. Of course, there are many developments. I don't want to say that nothing is happening, but keep in mind that something should happen faster than the challenger, and the challenger is already there. Okay. Now, another issue that I would like to introduce is that today we are facing three, which is actually one main problem. Humans need to change their ways of learning in order to stay where they are today. Because the evolution of computers is there, and it is happening day by day. So how do humans change? How do I get a new skill? How I change my attitude? And you see, there's something that is going to happen in the next years. The most advanced nations, that they have very well prepared processes on the workers and on their skills, they know very well how to do their work, they will face a huge problem, because when someone knows very well how to write on a paper, you cannot tell him the next day that he should throw away the paper and go in a computer. And there is a challenge. So how do humans change? They change by knowledge, but then you have also the skills, and most importantly, the attitudes. And which are our tools there? Also, this accumulation of knowledge is fast enough? And which are our tools to make it faster, so that we will prevail or stay at the level we are today. And introducing what I said to you before, how we learn now and in the past, practically with the same way. This is why this today conference is revolutionary, and it's very important, because it poses on the map the very critical question that will decide if us as human beings will stay in the planet on the pyramid top as we are today. And the question is if we learn fast enough and effectively to keep our position there. And another question which is very important, when you teach adults, and this is something that we are doing because we do train of the trainers, and there you see that when you teach adults, you need active participation. And of course, this is not the characteristic only of the adults, you already described it very well, from children to other categories of students, etc., that when you involve people, then you see much more results. When you let them co-create their learning, then the results are very fast. But still, these processes are just a vague idea of how we learn. We don't really know how we learn. There are some excellent books about this, but still the theories are theories that are passive theories. We pray to learn faster. We notice a few things that let us understand that we learn faster, for example, by participation. And then we devise some theories from design thinking or whatever else to make it faster. But still, it's not fast enough comparing to the artificial intelligence changes of the last decade. And also, if we accept that human learning effectiveness is vital for our survival, why we don't do anything about that? Where is the science that deals with it? And I'm talking about science. And today and yesterday we discussed about interdisciplinarity of sciences. Yeah, that's okay, but where is the science of making us learning more effectively? One science. We found out that it's not existing, and perhaps it could not be devised there. Therefore, perhaps the idea, like the last examples that I saw from the Scandinavian countries, which are very well developed on this, they say, what did they say to us? That make innovation, put the people on the market, create things that people understand. So science is not anymore an abstract thing. If it remains an abstract thing, interdisciplinarity will be lost. It's not a point anymore of creating new mathematics. We have so many information and sciences there, and our main point now is to make them work for us, and not make us work for them. Because when we work for them, we find all these problems, from the environmental to the war issues and the other things happening. So I would suggest that our main effort should be on searching in new effective methods, and I pray and hope that at some time, with initiatives like this one, this excellent initiative, we will have the opportunity to devise this new era. Thank you very much.
Team 4, Co-Creative Environment, Art Sci Tech, Trialogue 7.
Let's invite our speakers to the stage for some discussion.
I'll give you one in a moment.
Okay, the first question seems to be addressed at Professor Tzanev. Do you consider art as a tool to understand better abstract concepts in mathematics, such as symmetry? But also the other speakers, please, you can also answer.
Yes, of course, I think that no such difference between science and art. Always the artists investigate abstract concepts, interesting about philosophy, about mathematics. Leonardo Dürer is the, and maybe one very interesting example is the Professor Charles Lebrun. This is the first rector of Royal French Academy of Painting and Sculpture. That was found in 1648, I think. And he wrote two tractates. The second is more famous. It's about face expression. But the first is lost. But the drawings are in the drawing collection in the Louvre. And this a very interesting investigation. Today we may define this as a neuroaesthetic work about the similarities between human mentality and animal mentality. This is the question raised by Aristotle, but yes, I stop here. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else would like to talk to this? If not, the second question. Let's see. This is definitely addressed to everyone, and especially to Dr. KATHARAKIS. Should the producers of data and information be responsible for teaching humans how to ingest it efficiently?
Okay, if I may start this. I think, yes, this is very important. And actually, I'll tell you the following. Most of you already know about the triple helix of growth, which has the academy, it has the industry, and it has also the government or the local government. And we found out after many years of application of this kind of development model that this is not working, because you need the fourth helix model, which is introducing the people, introducing the users, introducing the social economy, the people that will be the material for all this helix to work. And now we are talking about the fourth helix. So in the same idea, it is very important to have the technology that is produced, introduced to the audience, to make them participate, to find a way that people will have experiences with new technology. Otherwise, the technology will stay on the technology itself, and it will never be an innovation, and it will never affect the lives of the people for the good scope. So I believe, yes, definitely, it has to do, and we have very nice examples today of, I think, in Finland, that people already take this step, and instead of just leaving the innovation on the shelves, they create products, they create matter, and this matter is much more familiar and usable from the people.
If I may just add, to a couple of points you've just made, I think we're already seeing this happening with biofeedback, a couple of examples I gave already, but I think if we look at how smart technology watches have started to develop our own understanding of how we use our own data, and many organizations, but Fitbit, for example, the data is produced, but then we're learning how to use or convert that data into something that's more meaningful. So if you think about how that data converts into lifestyle, that then converts into health, for example, many other kind of uses. But I think already we're starting to see how biofeedback and the data is becoming more useful for us as not users, but people, as humans.
Okay, thank you. The next question is for Dr. KATHARAKIS. Are you familiar with the study by psychology professor Georgi Lozanov, Suggestopedia, which scientifically proved the method of learning back in 1978?
Well, not specifically, I'm not aware of this method, but I know there are several tries. The point is that none of them are used or in daily life. So I would be glad to discuss with Mr. Mikhailov to learn about this method. But there are several suggestions, but they stay as a suggestions. They are not introduced in the systems. They are not viable. They are not sustainable. They don't seem to exist around us. And the point is not only to start working, but start working effectively, because the other part is running, and it's running very fast.
Okay, thank you. The next question is for Mr. Reynolds and Manu. How do we quantify curiosity or create more value in curiosity?
I'll have a go at that. I'll start off. So while we've already identified the issue around trying to quantify exactly what curiosity is because it's intangible, throughout our own practice and as course leaders on applied imagination and throughout UAL, we see it as embedded and integrated within what we call learning outcomes. So we look for that in very different ways. And so, for example, if we're looking for a learning outcome that might demonstrate risk-taking or a learning outcome that might demonstrate experimentation, of course, we're looking for and we hope that the students are able to evidence a certain level of curiosity. We can't put a number on that. I can't say to a student, well, actually, you've been 45% more creative or curious today. But we use that as a benchmark to see how we can demonstrate to some degree and find evidence of a student's capabilities of being able to be curious. And of course, if we think about its application to assessment, that's a very separate area. Because I think if we start to quantify it, then we start getting into the space where it becomes about grade-centric and students become too solution-focused on the actual grades themselves. So in many ways, and I'm backtracking here because I think it's important that we see curiosity not as something that is necessarily quantifiable, but is embedded as part of learning and not necessarily assessment. So we like to see that emerge. And just to finish off, I think it's important that we see that through what we call reflection. The student is able to reflect on how curious they've been throughout their process.
Can I add also to Richie's answer, the great enemy, in my view, of creativity or any kind of original thinking is fear. You know, people are so afraid. Even people starting out a master's course in art school, like ours, have come through an education system where they have been, frankly, indoctrinated with the idea that at every stage of everything they have to do, they must be correct, or something bad will happen to them. When you look at the next question about being wrong, it's very connected with the question about curiosity. If you're going to let your curiosity flow, and perhaps even something exciting or new happen, you have to let go of this fear of being wrong. Most things are wrong at the beginning. You know, the Wright brothers aircraft is a rubbishy, rackety, claptrap piece of machinery that no one would fly in today in their right minds, but it was the best you could achieve in 1907. We have to have access to that mindset of not worrying about being wrong, but worrying about coming up with a new question and the best answer for that question at that time we're able to do.
Thank you very much. And would you like to continue by expanding on how being wrong or error is used in applied imagination?
I kind of thought I just was. We try to give students license to be wrong because it's only by being wrong fearlessly and not being afraid that at every step in their journey someone will judge them. Richie's got a great quote from James Dyson he uses a lot of the time. How does it go? Of the famous Dyson vacuum cleaner, I designed 2,999?
Over 4,000.
4,000 versions that didn't work, but the 4,001st did.
And I think just to follow on just very briefly is for us not to demonize failure. I think the first thing we do is it gets students okay with the idea that failure is part of the iterative process, and that's very important. So in many ways, we're designing projects where failure is part of that process, and we actually make that as part of their learning process and for them to reflect on that. So often we look for, we have academic papers that we put out to the students, and part of the reading pack is to get them to be okay with this idea of failure, theorize it, so look at theory that supports failure as a part of the learning process, and help them develop skills to help them to reflect on failure. So it's perfectly okay for us to read a student's journal and for them to be open about experiments that didn't work, people perhaps that they met that perhaps there weren't fruitful meetings, and for them to be able to see the positive side of that.
A few years ago, I wrote a brief demanding that our students design a working time machine that could travel either to the past or the future. Now, that's a request that violates the laws of physics, and therefore, by any normal interpretation, any response to that project is going to be a failure. In fact, the project produced the most extraordinarily inventive outcomes connected with time, time as a commodity, time as an exchange, that expanded students' awareness and how to interpret a brief in extraordinary directions, because they could not succeed in that brief within any narrow interpretation of what success might actually mean.
If I may add something on these statements, which are absolutely correct in my opinion, the art thing inside the education has exactly this role, to let people be more liberal, to let them express themselves, because artists are always free, and if they are not free, they are not successful. And you can also see it all in the educational process. When you introduce some terms using some pictures, you see a much faster approach than when you try to describe or you try to give them in a written text. So I'm absolutely agreeing with this.
Thank you very much, and let's thank our speakers one more time.
Up to you.
Performance 8. The sound of the sketches we make.